Hi, I'm Vanessa Carter. I'm 31, and I'm the black sheep turned billionaire. At least, that's what my sister used to call me. And let me tell you, nothing stings more than being humiliated by your own flesh and blood. In front of their friends, colleagues, and boss. You see, I went from being the failure in my family to someone her CEO literally bows to. Yes, bows. Like I was royalty. If you had told me 5 years ago that the top executive of a $2 billion company would one day address me with such reverence, I would have laughed in your face. Back then, my biggest concern was making rent and figuring out what freelancing even truly meant beyond a fancy word for unemployed artist. My sister, Caroline, the epitome of corporate success and family pride, loved to subtly, and not so subtly, remind me of my perceived shortcomings. Those memories, the sting of her words, they fueled me in ways I never anticipated. But how did we get here? How did my sister's cruel laughter freeze over into stunned silence at her own office gala? How did a casual jab about my past morph into her CEO, a man who commands rooms full of powerful people, rushing towards me with an almost reverent expression? The transformation wasn't instant. It was a slow burn, a quiet revolution happening beneath the surface, completely unnoticed by the very people who were so quick to judge. Everyone saw the struggling artist, the lost sibling. No one, especially not Caroline, saw the strategic mind quietly building an empire from the ground up, shrouded in secrecy and powered by innovation. Have you ever had someone underestimate you? Until it was far too late? Have you felt the weight of expectations, the dismissive smiles, the thinly veiled condescension from those who should have been your biggest cheerleaders? It's a unique kind of pain, one that leaves an imprint. But it can also be a powerful motivator. It forces you to look inward, to trust your instincts, and to pursue your own path, regardless of external validation. For years, I endured the family gatherings where I was the topic of whispered concern, the subject of unsolicited career advice, and the constant comparison to my successful, older sister. I learned to smile and nod, to internalize the criticism, and to channel that energy into something productive. If so, get comfortable. Like, comment, and subscribe because you'll want to hear every second of this revenge story. This isn't just about a moment of satisfaction. It's about the journey of finding your own worth, building something from nothing, and ultimately allowing your success to speak for itself. It's about the silent triumph of the underdog, the quiet victory that resonates louder than any shouting match. So settle in, because this is the story of how the black sheep finally came home, not to beg for forgiveness, but to show them what she had built in the shadows. My sister, Caroline, always excelled. From the moment she could walk, she was destined for greatness, or so our family believed. She was the golden girl, the one who effortlessly aced every test, captained every sports team, and charmed every adult in her path. Valedictorian of her high school class, a prestigious university acceptance, and now a high-powered corporate executive at a luxury real estate firm right here in the heart of Manhattan. Her LinkedIn profile was a masterclass in achievement, a carefully curated chronicle of success that our parents often, and rather unsubtly, held up as the gold standard. Then there was me, the artsy dropout. The one who, after a year and a half of bouncing between art classes and philosophy lectures, decided the traditional academic path wasn't my destiny. I was the embarrassment, the lost cause, the one who was perpetually finding herself, a phrase that always came with a sigh or a knowing, pitying glance from Caroline. While she was climbing the corporate ladder, negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, I was exploring abstract expressionism, dabbling in coding boot camps, and trying to figure out how to make a living doing something that actually ignited my soul. Our lives diverged so dramatically that, eventually, our conversations dwindled. The last time we had a proper chat, not just a strained holiday greeting, was almost 2 years before that pivotal night. The silence between us was thick with unspoken judgments and simmering resentments. So, when the ornate, embossed invitation to her company's exclusive holiday gala arrived in my mailbox, I was genuinely surprised. Caroline wasn't one for grand gestures, especially not towards me. My first thought was that it must have been a mistake, a stray invitation from a mailing list oversight. But then a small, almost imperceptible note was tucked inside in her familiar, elegant script. Mama insisted. Try to be on time. I pity guessed. That was it. I wasn't being invited because she missed me or because she valued my presence. I was being invited to fulfill a familial obligation, to avoid a lecture from our mother about mending fences. The thought stung, of course, but it also sparked something else within me, a quiet resolve. I debated whether to go for days. Mira, my best friend, was my sounding board during this internal struggle. Vanessa, she'd said, this is your chance. Not for revenge, but for you to show up, shine, and remind them that your path, however unconventional, is valid. Her words resonated. I realized it wasn't about Caroline or her judgment anymore. It was about me. It was about walking into that lion's den not as the ghost sister they barely remembered, but as someone who had, in fact, found herself in ways they couldn't even begin to imagine. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was Caroline, thriving in the cutthroat real estate world, built on tangible assets and visible success, while I had been quietly constructing an empire in the ethereal, invisible realm of artificial intelligence. Oh, little did she know that the pity guest was about to become an unexpected force, a presence that would shake the very foundations of her meticulously constructed world. The invitation wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a ticket to a showdown, a stage set for a reveal she would never see coming. And I, the artsy dropout, the black sheep, was ready to play my part. Night of the gala arrived, and with it, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a simple, elegant black minimalist gown, a stark contrast to the expected opulence of a high-society New York City event. I wasn't trying to outshine anyone. I was aiming for quiet confidence, a subtle rebellion against the norms of that world. As I stepped out of the taxi and into the grand ballroom of the venue, it was immediately clear I was an anomaly. The room shimmered with sequins, rustled with designer silks, and clinked with extravagant jewelry. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the hum of forced conviviality. My gown, while sophisticated, almost felt like a deliberate undercurrent in a sea of overt glitz. I guess I didn't match the glitzy, polished Wall Street wives or the impeccably tailored suits of their husbands. There were a few curious glances, a momentary pause in conversations, but I held my head high and moved with purpose. I found Caroline near a group of her colleagues, her laugh echoing a little too loudly through the room. She was wearing something shimmering, tailored to perfection, looking every inch the successful corporate executive she was. She caught my eye, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of surprise, perhaps even a hint of discomfiture, but it vanished quickly. She barely acknowledged my presence beyond a quick, detached nod. When I approached her table, she offered a dismissive wave towards her colleagues. "Oh, this is just my sister," she announced, her tone laced with a performative casualness. Then, with a slight, almost imperceptible curl of her lip, she added, "She does freelance or something." The pause that followed was excruciatingly polite. Her colleagues, well practiced in the art of social deflection, offered polite, strained smiles and a few measured chuckles. Their laughter felt manufactured, designed to smooth over the awkwardness, but it still landed on me like a tangible weight. Inside, I was boiling. Every nerve ending screamed in protest. It was the same dismissive tone, the same belittling implication I'd heard countless times before, but now amplified by the public stage. Yet, I didn't flinch. My smile remained serene, unyielding. I met their gaze calmly, an unsettlingly quiet presence in their boisterous circle. The evening wore on, a relentless barrage of microaggressions. Caroline, fueled by champagne and perhaps a desperate need to assert her superiority, continued her subtle assault. During a toast to the company's success, she raised her glass and, with a knowing low, "Okay in my direction," delivered a passive-aggressive speech about the importance of focused ambition and direct career paths, implicitly mocking my life journey and unconventional choices. It was a thinly veiled jab, obvious to anyone who knew us, and likely amusing to her circle of sycophants. Her words were like tiny, sharp needles pricking at old wounds. Still, I smiled. I laughed at the appropriate moments. I engaged in polite, superficial conversations with her colleagues who, to their credit, seemed genuinely unaware of the underlying dynamic. My outward calm was a shield, protecting the furious storm raging within. Every scoff, every condescending remark, every forced laugh from her friends, it all solidified my resolve. Retribution was near, not in an explosive, dramatic fashion, but in a quiet, undeniable way. They had no idea who I truly was, what I had accomplished in my supposed freelance or something life. And the best part? They were about to find out, not from me, but from a source they respected and revered. The smile I maintained wasn't one of agreement or defeat. It was the confident grin of someone who held a winning hand, just waiting for the right moment to lay it on the table. The longer Caroline mocked, the deeper she dug her own grave. And the sweeter the impending moment of truth would be. What Caroline didn't know, what no one in that room, save for a select few who were bound by ironclad non-disclosure agreements, knew, was that I wasn't just freelancing. That vague, dismissive term she used to describe my life was a profound understatement, a blind spot in her perception of the world that would soon prove to be her undoing. For the past 5 years, while Caroline diligently scaled the corporate ladder, I had been immersed in a completely different kind of ascent. I had co-founded a silent AI startup, a venture born from late-night coding sessions, countless cups of awful coffee, and an unwavering belief in the transformative power of artificial intelligence. My co-founder, Robert Zhang, was a genius, a recluse by nature who preferred the quiet solitude of his servers to any spotlight. His brilliance lay in the intricate algorithms, the complex architecture, the very heartbeat of our technology, which we called autologic. My role was different. I was the conceptualizer, the problem solver, the bridge between abstract data and real-world application. Together, we had built something truly revolutionary, a system designed to intuitively understand and optimize complex environments. Our product was discreet, powerful, and, most importantly for our early stages, completely anonymous. We cultivated that anonymity fiercely. Due to the sensitive nature of our proprietary technology and the potential for market disruption, we had signed some of the most restrictive NDAs imaginable with our investors and, eventually, with our acquirer. My face wasn't tied to the company, my name wasn't plastered on press releases, and I liked it that way. It allowed us to focus, to innovate without the constant white noise of public scrutiny or competitive pressures. We were the quiet disruptors, the ghost in the machine. Then, 6 months ago, everything changed. Our little silent startup had been acquired by a Fortune 100 conglomerate, a tech Goliath with the resources to propel Autologic into the stratosphere. The acquisition was massive, confidential, and incredibly lucrative. It meant our technology would now redefine industries. Even after the sale, our preference for anonymity was largely maintained by the conglomerate, given the sensitive nature of the AI and its applications. I was still Vanessa Carter, not Vanessa Carter, CEO of X Global Tech, and that suited me perfectly. Until now. The pieces only clicked into place a few weeks before the gala. A casual conversation with Mira, who'd seen a tech news blurb about Caroline's firm. She'd mentioned something about their big new partnership, a groundbreaking move into smart properties, leveraging cutting-edge AI for optimization and client experience. My ears perked up. I did some quiet digging. And then I felt a chill run down my spine, a complex mix of disbelief and a strange, powerful sense of vindication. Her firm, Northwood Development, had just formed a strategic alliance with the very same Fortune 100 conglomerate that acquired my startup. Their grand plan? To transition their vast luxury real estate portfolio into intelligent, adaptive properties, all powered by Autologic. My Autologic. The very algorithms Robert and I had painstakingly crafted, the architecture I had personally shaped from concept to execution, was now the backbone of Caroline's company's future. The technology that she unknowingly boasted about, the one that was set to launch her firm into a new era of profitability and prestige, originated from the freelance or something sister. The irony was delicious, almost poetic. For years, she had dismissed my pursuits as frivolous, financially unsound, and a waste of potential. She saw a dropout, an artist, someone unable to conform to the rigid structures she revered. She never bothered to look deeper, to understand what I was truly building in my quiet corner of the world. And now, her golden path, her shining career, was indirectly tethered to the very failure she routinely mocked. This was no longer just about personal vindication. It was about the silent, unstoppable force of true innovation, thriving where rigid traditionalism only saw empty spaces. Suddenly, my presence at the gala as a pity guest felt like destiny. The stage was set. Evening was progressing as I expected. A predictable tableau of false smiles, clinking glasses, and the pervasive hum of champagne-fueled conversations. Caroline was in her element, holding court, basking in the glow of her perceived success, and, of course, continuing to needle me with thinly veiled criticisms. She had just launched into our anecdote, a particularly barbed one about how I'd once worked at a coffee shop during my experimental phase and apparently couldn't even get the latte art right. Her table mats offered polite, nervous titters, glancing at me with a mix of pity and awkward amusement. I maintained my serene, seemingly unbothered expression, but inside I could feel the familiar burn of injustice. The irony was, working at that coffee shop had been one of the most formative experiences, where I'd first truly appreciated user experience and iterative design principles that would later become cornerstones of autologic. But that was a depth Caroline never cared to explore. Suddenly, amidst the monotonous symphony of the party, my eyes caught a figure moving with an undeniable sense of purpose. He was weaving through the clusters of well-dressed guests, his gaze sweeping the room. It was Gregory Wells, Caroline's CEO, the man who ran a $2 billion empire, a titan in the real estate world, known for his sharp mind and even sharper business instincts. He was a presence, commanding attention without ever raising his voice. His eyes, keen and intelligent, scanned the room, and then, inexplicably, they landed on me. For a split second, I saw recognition dawn in them, followed by a widening of his eyes, a flicker of genuine surprise that cut through his polished demeanor. It was a look I recognized, the look of someone seeing an unexpected, yet profoundly important, piece of a puzzle. My heart gave a tiny, anticipatory flutter. This was it. Within seconds, he changed direction, his powerful stride carrying him directly toward our table. He moved with an urgency that clearly indicated this was no casual greeting. Caroline, still mid-rant about my supposed lack of practical skills, was completely oblivious. She was laughing, her head thrown back, reveling in her own cleverness, her voice carrying across the polished floor. And honestly, she was saying she thought she could just manifest success. I kept telling her, "Vanessa, darling, the world doesn't work on artistic whims." Her circle chuckled on cue. Gregory Wells arrived at our table, the clinking of glasses and chatter around us seeming to dim as his presence dominated the space. He didn't interrupt Caroline. He didn't need to. He simply stood there for a moment, his gaze fixed on me, a deep respect evident in his eyes. Then, just as Caroline wound down her story, still beaming with self-satisfaction, he performed the most unexpected gesture. With a subtle, almost imperceptible dip of his head, a gesture of profound deference, Gregory Wells bowed slightly. It wasn't a casual nod. It was a formal, respectful bow, the kind you offer to someone of immense significance, true royalty. And then he spoke, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the remaining hum of the party like a perfectly struck bell. "Ma'am," he said, his tone carrying an unmistakable reverence. "I didn't expect to see you here." The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. My sister, in the middle of taking a celebratory sip of her wine, choked. Wine sloshed from her glass, staining the pristine white tablecloth. The laughter died, not just at our table, but from the surrounding patrons who had overheard his distinct address. The entire table fell silent, a sudden, jarring void in the cacophony of the gala. All eyes, wide and bewildered, shifted from the CEO to me, then back to the CEO, then to Caroline, whose face was rapidly draining of color. The air crackled with a sudden, palpable tension. The moment I had anticipated, the quiet, powerful reveal had arrived. And it was even more spectacular than I had envisioned. The air was suddenly thick with unspoken questions. Her coworkers stared, their expressions a mix of confusion and burgeoning curiosity. They knew Gregory Wells. They knew he didn't just bow to anyone, let alone address them with such profound respect. Who was this woman, this ma'am, who had just materialized at their table, introduced moments ago as merely Caroline's freelance sister? The silence was deafening, amplified by the scattered murmurs of guests nearby who had also witnessed the extraordinary exchange. Caroline, having recovered from her near-choking incident, finally found her voice, though it was several octaves higher than usual and tinged with a desperate blend of embarrassment and bewilderment. Her face, usually so composed, was now a blotchy red. You two know each other? She stammered, her gaze darting frantically between Gregory and me, seeking an explanation, a way to regain control of a situation that had spiraled wildly out of her grasp. The implication in her question was clear. How could her esteemed CEO possibly know her failure sister, and why was he acting as if I was royalty? Gregory Wells, sensing the widespread confusion and the precariousness of the social moment, offered a nervous, almost apologetic smile. He turned fully towards me, implicitly acknowledging me as the central figure. Vanessa Carter, he began, his voice still holding that note of immense respect. The Vanessa Carter. I must apologize, ma'am. I had no idea you would be joining us tonight. We've been trying to reach you with no success. Then, he turned slightly to Caroline and her colleagues, his expression shifting to one of mild awe. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Vanessa Carter. She is, quite simply, one of the brilliant minds responsible for Autologic. Without her vision and architectural genius, our groundbreaking partnership for the Northwood Quantum project simply wouldn't exist. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. We owe you everything, Vanessa. Your insights and creative architecture shaped the entire Autologic system from its very foundation. Murmurs rippled through the table. Gasps could be heard. The names Autologic and Northwood Quantum were buzzwords, the future of their company, the very reason St of them were celebrating tonight. The implications of Gregory Wells' statement hit them like a tidal wave. Their CEO was attributing the foundation of their firm's highly touted future success to this woman, my freelance sister. Caroline's face, which had been beet red moments ago, now turned an ashen white. Her jaw went slack. The realization, slow and painful, dawned in her eyes. The anonymous tech giant that had provided the revolutionary AI platform was, in part, me. Her carefully constructed world, built on her perceived superiority, was crumbling. Gregory, seemingly oblivious to the interpersonal drama he had just ignited, reached into his inner jacket pocket. He produced a small, elegant silver token, embossed with the corporate logo of the Fortune 100 conglomerate that had acquired my startup. He extended it to me with both hands, a gesture of profound respect. This is a special invitation, Vanessa, he explained, his voice low and earnest. An invite to the upcoming Founders Board retreat for Autologic. We'd hoped to have you there personally. We've been trying to reach you through all conventional channels, but your privacy filters are remarkably effective. We consider you a founder, and your continuous input is invaluable. The token, the invitation, the explicit statement that my privacy settings had made me unreachable to a Fortune 100 company, it all added layers to the mystique, transforming Caroline's sister into the Vanessa Carter, a reclusive genius whose technology was shaping their very careers. I took the token, my fingers brushing his, and offered a small, composed smile. The silent thunder I had prepared was now echoing through the room, and the look on Caroline's face was worth every single dismissive comment she had ever uttered after Gregory Wells made his dramatic exit, leaving a stunned silence and a trail of bewildered whispers in his wake. The atmosphere at our table was irrevocably altered. My sister's colleagues, who moments before had been laughing at her jokes, now eyed me with a mixture of awe and newfound respect. The polite chuckles were replaced by deferential nods and hesitant, curious glances. Caroline, still visibly shaken, mumbled some excuse about needing fresh air, her usual poise completely shattered. Her face was still unnaturally pale, a stark contrast to her earlier high color. A short while later, as I was politely deflecting questions from a curious junior executive who clearly saw me as his new golden ticket, I felt a familiar, trembling hand on my arm. It was Caroline. Her grip was surprisingly tight, almost desperate. Vanessa, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the remaining party din. Can we talk somewhere private? I regarded her for a moment, letting the silence stretch. This was a side of Caroline I hadn't seen in years. Gone was the confident executive, the mocking older sister. In her place was a woman who looked vulnerable, almost fragile. Imply nodded and allowed her to lead me to a quieter, dimly lit alcove away from the main ballroom. The distance between us, both physically and emotionally, had never been more pronounced. Once we were out of earshot, her composure completely crumbled. Her voice trembled, a stark contrast to the firm, assertive tone she usually adopted. "Why didn't you tell me?" she burst out, her voice raspy, a desperate plea for understanding hidden beneath the accusation. She wasn't asking about autologic specifically, not really. She was asking why I had let her believe I was a failure, why I had allowed her to mock me, why I had hidden this monumental success from her. I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms, and let a sweet, almost melancholic smile play on my lips. "Tell you what, Caroline?" I asked, my voice calm, almost dangerously so. "That I wasn't just freelancing anymore? That the little artsy dropout had actually built something substantial? That the technology powering your firm's most significant strategic pivot came from my mind?" I paused, letting the weight of my words settle between us. "You never asked. You were too busy mocking me." Her eyes shifted, unable to meet mine directly. She wrung her hands, then instinctively reached out as if to touch my arm, but thought better of it. "But I'm your sister," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Don't you think I had a right to know?" "A right?" I echoed softly, but with an underlying edge. "When was the last time you expressed any genuine interest in my life beyond finding new ways to belittle my choices? When was the last time you saw me as anything other than a comparative tool for your own success? You saw what you wanted to see, Caroline. A convenient mirror for your own achievements." She began to apologize then, a torrent of hurried, disjointed words. "I'm sorry, I truly am. I never meant. I just..." But it wasn't genuine guilt behind her words. I could see it clearly in her eyes, in the frantic way her gaze kept darting around the room as if calculating the potential fallout. It wasn't remorse for the years of dismissiveness. It was fear. Fear that I now held significant, undeniable influence. Fear that my quiet, long-ignored success could somehow overshadow hers, or worse, directly impact her career. The realization hit me. Her apology wasn't for me. It was for her, for the sudden, terrifying shift in power dynamics. She feared that I now had more influence over her company's future than she did. And she was right. It wasn't about malice or trying to destroy her, but it was a truth she had to confront. The black sheep wasn't just in the room. She was the architect of the very ground Caroline stood on. And the silence, the quiet, understated reality of that fact was more potent than any shouted accusation could ever be. Th. Gala was just the beginning. The revelation of my identity, or rather, the revelation of my true professional identity, sent ripples through Northwood Development. It confirmed for everyone what Gregory Wells had hinted at, and what I had known for some time. A fundamental power shift had occurred. Caroline's carefully constructed world, built on her perceived superiority, was now inadvertently dependent on the very person she had relentlessly dismissed. The weeks that followed were fascinating to observe, almost like a carefully orchestrated play. The internal grapevine at Northwood Development hummed with excited whispers. My name, once unknown to most, became synonymous with innovation and the future. Gregory Wells, a shrewd businessman who understood the power of leveraging new connections, wasted no time. He recognized the immense value in having the architect of Autologic publicly aligned with his firm. An invitation arrived, not for a gala, but for something far more substantial. I was formally invited by Northwood Development to speak on innovation and disruption in real estate at their upcoming quarterly summit, a high-profile event attended by industry leaders and potential investors. It was clear what this was, a public endorsement, a strategic move to solidify their partnership with the conglomerate and, by extension, with the technology the conglomerate had acquired. I agreed, of course. It was an opportunity not just to solidify my own standing, but to subtly, yet definitively, reshape the narrative. The summit was meticulously organized. The ballroom was packed. And there, in the front row, an almost regal fixture, sat Caroline. She was dressed impeccably, a forced smile plastered on her face, and throughout my presentation, she was compelled to clap at the appropriate moments. Each round of applause, each polite nod from her, felt like a silent acknowledgement of the new reality. I spoke not just about Autologic, but about the democratization of technology, about nurturing unconventional talent, and about how true innovation often emerged from unexpected places, thinly veiled references to my own journey, which I knew would resonate with some and make others, like Caroline, uncomfortable. As a gesture, And to amplify the message of fostering new talent, I announced a significant financial donation during my speech. This wasn't just any donation. It was a generous sum, made publicly under Caroline's name, to a prominent charity dedicated to providing technological education and opportunities for underprivileged youth. The charity's mission was explicitly about empowering pathways for those who might not fit traditional molds, helping them find themselves in tech. It was a subtle nod to her past mockery, a way to reframe her dismissive phrase into a positive, impactful action. She had to sit there, forced to smile and accept the public praise for a philanthropic act that wasn't hers, yet directly benefited from my success. The press, eager for a catchy angle, gleefully picked up on the story. One prominent tech publication ran a piece labeling her the sister of the Sill, icon ghost, a direct reference to my anonymity and the quiet power I wielded. Her nickname for me, the Ghost Sister, had come back to haunt her in the most public, ironic way possible. The power shift wasn't just evident in the boardroom or at the summit. It began to permeate the family dynamic too. My parents, who had once subtly pushed me towards a more stable career, started seeking my advice on tech-related matters, their pride now undeniably visible. The social landscape around Caroline also began to change. Her colleagues, who had used to laugh along with her, now treated her with a curious blend of caution and pity. The whispers intensified, not about my perceived failures, but about her future, her job security, and what this new connection meant for her standing within the company. The golden girl, who had always shone so brightly, was now perpetually in the shadow of the once dismissed black sheep. And I, the quiet observer, simply continued to rise, with the Silicon Ghost label clinging to her and whispers swirling about her job security. Caroline's carefully constructed image began to fray at the edges. Her colleagues, who once saw her as the epitome of success, now perceived her through the new lens of my unexpected influence. The shift was subtle but undeniable inside her company, and it visibly impacted her. The effortless confidence that had marked her presence had been replaced by a noticeable anxiety. This newfound vulnerability in her, born from the public power shift, completely altered our dynamic. It wasn't long before Caroline initiated contact, tentatively at first, then with increasing frequency. The lunch invitations started appearing in my inbox, polite but persistent. They weren't the dismissive pity lunches of old. These carried an undertone of earnestness, a desire to reconnect, or perhaps to understand. Then came the family group chat messages, subtle at first. A shared article about a new tech trend, clearly aimed at me, a benign question about a family event, suddenly including me in the conversation more directly than she ever had before. It was a conscious effort on her part to reestablish a kinship that she herself had severed through years of neglect and derision. The most telling sign, however, was when she casually, almost sheepishly, mentioned the idea of family therapy to our parents, suggesting it might be good for everyone to work through some old issues. It was clear she was primarily advocating for herself, an attempt to mend bridges she had consciously burnt, now that those bridges led directly to my success. But I wasn't interested in revenge through cruelty. My purpose wasn't to tear her down, but to live my truth, to flourish, and let my success speak for itself. The very public humiliation at the gala, and the continued subtle shifts in her standing, were simply the natural consequences of her past actions. I had always believed that true power lay not in overt displays, but in quiet, unshakable confidence. To sink to her level, to engage in the very belittling tactics she had employed, would have been a disservice to my own journey. Instead, I chose a different path. I responded to some of her messages politely, declined the lunch invitations with vague but firm excuses about my busy schedule, and gently steered away from the therapy suggestions. I gave her what she had made me feel for so long: invisibility. Not a cruel, targeted invisibility, but an earned disinterest. My focus was on my work, on expanding my ventures, on collaborating with brilliant minds. I flourished quietly, continuing to build my silent empire, out of sight and out of mind when it came to her direct impact on my life. It was a silent thunder she could never forecast. She had spent years trying to diminish my light, convinced that her way was the only way to shine. Now, she was realizing that my light wasn't dependent on her approval or even her awareness. It burned brightly on its own. casting a long shadow that inevitably fell over her. And because I didn't engage in heated arguments or retaliate with public put-downs, the space between us remained defined by my quiet assent and her palpable discomfort. It was a unique form of poetic justice, delivered not with fire, but with the cool, relentless force of my own evolving success. The black sheep was no longer chasing the golden girl's approval. She was simply forging her own, more compelling, legend. Strategic distance I maintained in the weeks following the summit was purposeful. It wasn't about inflicting pain, but about allowing the natural consequences of Caroline's past behavior to settle. My flourishing was quiet, my ascent steady, and my focus was entirely on what lay ahead. There was no need for grand pronouncements or dramatic confrontations. The universe, in its own intricate way, was delivering the message. The final act of this particular drama unfolded several months later. The invitation arrived, a crisp official document, inviting me to deliver insights to the board of directors of Northwood Development. Not just to speak at a summit, but to engage directly with the highest echelon of leadership, the individuals steering the very ship Caroline worked so hard to climb aboard. The board, her board. And Caroline? She wasn't on the invite list. The oversight wasn't malicious. It was simply a reflection of the new corporate reality. My insights, as the architect of their foundational technology, were deemed vital for their long-term strategy, a level of access that bypassed even senior executives. I walked through the polished, gleaming lobby of the skyscraper on the appointed day, the familiar weight of Manhattan towering above me. This wasn't the first time I'd been in a building like this, but this time felt different. There was no anxiety, no need to prove myself. I carried myself with the quiet grace of someone who no longer sought approval, someone whose worth was self-evident. The dismissive glares and polite laughter of the past felt like distant echoes, irrelevant to the present moment. As I approached the private elevators that led to the executive floors, I saw her. Caroline. She was emerging from a meeting down the hallway, surrounded by a few colleagues. Her posture, though still outwardly confident, lacked the effortless ease it once held. Her eyes, usually so sharp and appraising, looked tired, burdened by an invisible weight. Our paths converged directly in the hallway, a perfect, unplanned intersection. We locked eyes. For a split second, the hum of the busy hallway seemed to fade, and it was just us, framed by the gleaming marble and glass. In her eyes, I saw a complex tapestry of emotions. Surprise, a flicker of residual resentment, but also, unmistakably, a deep-seated recognition of where things now stood. She saw me, not as the freelance sister to be mocked, but as someone who commanded a different, perhaps even greater, form of power within the very ecosystem she inhabited. The silicon ghost had manifested. I offered a polite nod, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement. It was courteous, professional, and utterly devoid of any emotional charge. I didn't smile, not broadly, not sweetly, and certainly not with any hint of malice. I didn't need to. I simply acknowledged her presence, as one professional might acknowledge another. And I said nothing. That silence was deafening. It was louder than any insult she'd ever thrown at me, more cutting than any passive-aggressive toast. It spoke volumes about the shift in our relationship, about the paths we had taken, and about the power dynamic that now irrevocably favored me. It conveyed that there was nothing left to explain, nothing left to prove. My presence in that building, heading to that specific meeting, spoke louder than any words ever could. Her stunned expression, the slight slump of her shoulders as I continued past her, was all the validation I needed. Closure didn't come from a shouted argument or a tearful apology. It came finally and completely, clothed in silence. Funny how life works, isn't it? All those years, Caroline was the golden child. The one held up as the example, the one whose achievements were celebrated, whose path was deemed correct and successful. I was the black sheep, the one veering off course, the one with questionable choices and an uncertain future. She was the one parents proudly introduced. I became the one they bow to. It was never about tearing her down, not really. It was about proving to myself more than anyone that my path, however unconventional, was valid. That chasing what truly ignited my soul, even when it looked like freelancing or something to others could lead to something far more profound and impactful than any prescribed corporate ladder. Revenge in this story didn't come as a dramatic explosion of fire and fury. It wasn't a shouted victory or a public takedown designed to humiliate. Instead, it came as quiet supremacy, a calm, undeniable assertion of self-worth and genuine impact. The best part, the truly satisfying element, is that I never once had to raise my voice. I never resorted to the same petty slights or the dismissive laughter that had been directed at me for so long. There was no need. My actions, my creations, and the very real influence I now held spoke for themselves. The technology I helped build, the very algorithms that powered their future, presented an unassailable argument. There was nowhere to hide, no way to deny the reality of the power shift. I just rose. Silently, diligently, I built. While others were focused on outward appearances and perceived status, I was immersed in the quiet work of creation, of problem solving, of bringing complex ideas to life. And in the end, that quiet hard work, that persistent belief in my own unconventional vision culminated in a moment of undeniable triumph. It was a victory not just for me, but for anyone who has ever been made to feel small, overlooked, or told their dreams were too impractical. The dynamics between Caroline and me are forever altered. The forced smiles and the hesitant attempts at reconnection from her side are now part of our landscape, a constant reminder of how much things have changed. But I don't dwell on it. My focus is always forward, on the next innovation, the next challenge, the next opportunity to create something meaningful. That, in itself, is the purest form of satisfaction. So, next time someone mocks your journey, next time they underestimate your quiet efforts or dismiss your unconventional path, thank them. You're just giving them a front row seat to your rise. And believe me, that view is far more compelling than they could ever imagine.